Welcome back. We are doing our Tuesday spotlights. As always, we bring in beautiful guests or people from the DTLC who are sharing and teaching amazing things that we think you want to know that helps you move forward on your purpose-filled life. And today we have Dr. Trish Barrus. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, Connie, it's so good to be here.
It's one of our favorites. We love her. We've known each other for years. I'm so grateful for all that she has shared. And if you want more from her already, I'm going to lead you to some of the other podcasts that we've done 2 years ago that are so good on anxiety and depression. But today we're going to talk about addiction. So I'm going to give you her official bio, but just know if you or a loved one are dealing with addiction, any kinds, and even anxiety and depression, we'll touch on that just a little bit. But those kinds of issues are just so prevalent today, and we want you to be able to stay in a good, healthy space while you are helping your loved ones be able to deal with that addiction. So to give you the official bio right off the bat, Dr. Trish Henry Barrus is a positive psychologist and practicing clinician with specialty areas in wellness, addiction, anxiety, and depression. She has extensive experience in the areas of opioid and chemical addiction, pain management, depression, anxiety, and wellness. And as an assistant professor at the University of Utah, we still love you, BYU alum. We can be friends. She helped create the acclaimed Positive Psychology Undergraduate Certificate Program. This program attracts students from all over the world and from many different disciplines. Dr. Barrus also serves on 3 Utah state committees working on the opioid problem and is a published author and researcher and speaker. We are so excited to have her today and so blessed. So let's just jump right in here. You've been working on this topic of addiction, particularly for years. And I feel like it's all fingerling, it's all connected. Anxiety, depression, addiction. We have issues, we feel like we can't handle them, then we try to numb, or we try to not feel, or we don't know how to handle the feelings. Tell us, what are some of the biggest problems that you are seeing right now, especially coming out of this COVID-ish, pretty much, but kind of recovering from this? What are you seeing people struggling to deal with?
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit more because I think addiction is caused by some of the things that are happening, especially like you talked about with depression and COVID and things like that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about depression today and anxiety and how it goes into and what we can do with people. But 1 in 5 people have depression.
Mm.
Suicide is the leading cause of death among kids who are 10 to 15 years old.
Mm.
And it's just gotten worse since COVID. And so you have to know kind of why it's getting worse before you can treat it, right? Or
Yes.
we can help. And so this is my feeling about it. As I've seen people come in, and especially college kids, we've got terrible addiction issues and things with college kids. We thrive, people thrive on scheduling and being able to have something that is constant and consistent in their lives. And we have not had that since COVID. We still are struggling with that. And we're struggling with the just the opportunities and things like that, where kids are saying, what in the world? Am I ever going to be able to get a job?
Or live a normal life like what they saw their parents do, and seems, at their age, it seems to come with ease, and they don't realize all the building blocks that went into that. And then, at least the young adults I'm talking to, they feel so pressured that they've got a lot of these mental wellness issues that they're trying to deal with on the daily. And then even at college or in jobs, there's so much more pressure, inflation, all of these things, and they've got to deliver and do more in less time. And they're kind of coming off of this millennial feeling of, hey, I'll get to it when I get to it. Any thoughts on that?
I had a young man come into my office, and he was, he says, I was the captain of the lacrosse team. I did this and did this and this. And then all of a sudden I was put in this cubicle, and I didn't have any social. I didn't learn how to be social, and I can't remember how to do it anymore. And, we're living by fear, and we still are living by fear. And it's really, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm going to give you a little psychology thing right here, right?
Please.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that the number 1 thing is food, clothing, shelter. If we're hungry or tired or something like that, we can't progress in life. The second one is safety and security. How do we feel safe and secure when we don't know what's going to happen the next day. And it's really scaring kids.
Yes.
And then the other thing is, and especially, again, we just had another shooting.
Yes.
And, kids, yeah, how do I go to school and feel safe and everything? And then once you feel safe and secure, then you're able to progress in life. And the next one is belonging. Well, with masks and things like that, what did we teach our children?
You had to stay away, you had to isolate, don't hug, don't talk, don't get too close. And coming out of that, of saying, we don't necessarily need to do that anymore, but I love what you shared with that young adult, that I don't know how to do this anymore. So what do you suggest as parents, especially, or teachers or employers? How do we teach those skills? I was just speaking at BYU yesterday, and I was telling them what employers are looking for. And one of the biggest things is, how do they get along with others? What are their social skills in a business environment? And they struggle with that. So what are some things we can do to help them develop that?
Well, I think they have to have trust in themselves. And I think this is a huge thing as well, is that they did a study a couple of years ago when out at, point of the mountain, actually in Utah, where there was a lot of suicide going on. And they did this survey to find out, what is it that is causing this suicide and stuff? And do you know what the answer was? It was that they do not trust the adults in their lives.
Wow.
They don't, their parents, they don't trust their teachers, they don't trust their church leaders. And so for us to be able to, do and engender trust, and the reason why, they says everybody's hypocrites, they don't live like they say.
Do you know what's interesting about that? I can see what they're talking about, especially politics and all the variety of things, but we've had these issues for years. But what I also see, I don't know if you see this, is a real challenge with perfectionism. So there's this perfectionism, and if you say this, then I'm going to hold you to it forever and ever, and not room to be able to grow, adjust, say, oh, I made a mistake or whatever. And then there's this lack of trust. But they're doing it to themselves too. They lead themselves and pin themselves to this high, super high standard. And then when they can't meet it, which none of us can, then they just drop to this extreme. And then they're looking for a way to numb that depression, despair. I can't make it. I'm never going to make it. What do we do with this cycle?
Well, I think, again, it comes from in the home. A lot of times when I read my students' papers at the U, I have them do self-improvement projects. So they have to pick one thing that they improve upon using positive psychology. And the things that I read are, my parents expected me to do certain things. I didn't measure up. And the number one thing I see in my office all the time is, I am not good enough. And I am an imposter. If people really knew who I was. So it's getting them to really, really enjoy and value themselves.
That is so true. And I think what's so key as far as parents is letting them see our vulnerability, letting them see when we make mistakes and say, oh, I'm sorry. You know what? You're right. I didn't know that, or I didn't see that, or I did that wrong, and I need to do that better. Sorry about that. And that life goes on. We don't explode with it. We don't magnify it. We just take it in stride and say, all right, we're going to do it better tomorrow. Another thing that I have seen and heard from young adults is they don't like being talked at all the time, being told what they've got to do. This is how you do it. There's only one way to do it. And then if they don't do it that way, even if their gut is telling them to do it a different way, we're not giving them a time for dialogue and say, okay, well, what do you think? This just happened with my 10-year-old yesterday. He had cursive homework he had piled up at school. And he came home and I said, well, let's see, how long does it take you to do a page? How many pages do you need to do? Okay, why don't you do that? And if you want, you can do one page and then go play for 10 minutes and then come back to another page and do 10 minutes. Well, he tried it and it didn't work. And he said, Mom, I don't want to do it that way. Oh, my bad. I should have started off and said, how do you want to solve this? This is how long it looks like it's going to take. How do you want to make that happen? All right, let's try it and then see if it works. What other tips or thoughts do you have? Because I really find this lack of discussion, dialogue, involving people in the process, this sort of I am all knowledgeable and you're not, no matter what the age difference is. Tell us what we can do with some of that.
I'm going to just agree with you, because again, this generation doesn't want to be told.
No.
smart. They're smart. They're smarter than we are.
Yeah.
And I mean, and they know a lot more than we do about technology and all those sorts of things. There is a book out there called Honoring the Self, and it's by Nathaniel Branden. It's a wonderful book, and it talks, and it's just a little book, but it talks about the things we say to our children inadvertently that minimize them. And
Yes.
it's things like, you know, I know what the best thing is. You need to listen to me, and not listening or shutting them down. Or remember, we kind of had this when we were growing up. Children are to be seen and not heard, right?
So true. And if they didn't even say it, they meant it. You could feel it. Yeah.
And
like
so
my way is better.
yes, and some of that still, goes over. But the thing is it's be really listening to your child, and like you just did was wonderful. It didn't work. So now what are we going to do? That is just perfect, is being able to do that. But again, asking questions, I have people who come in and they'll say, oh my gosh, I just had this emotional thing and I didn't know how to help my child and everything. Instead of shutting them down and saying, it's okay, you'll be okay. Tell me about the emotions you're feeling. I think we've got to do that, because the fear and the things that are going on out there, the kids do not know how to handle those.
And they don't feel they have someone to talk to because they're worried they're going to get judged. I love this. One of my friends has a phrase she uses all the time that I have borrowed, and she'll say, tell me more about that. Tell me more about what that looks and feels like for you. And it's not a reporter question. Well, tell me more about that. It really is a kind concern. I've got time. Tell me what that looks like for you. And I'm not going to jump in and tell you how to solve it. I'm going to listen. I'm going to say, wow, that's hard. That feels hard. Just hearing what you're saying feels hard. What's something you want to take care of with this? Is there like a number one thing that's really causing you pain or stress that we could look at and maybe try to find a solution? So I love what you're talking about, and this creating a safe space. I think if anything that you're sharing with us, number one thing to do today is just create that safe space and that interest, and letting them know you want to know what they think and feel. Not, we've got 10 minutes before we got to get to the next sport. Let's go. Let's just solve this, get it done, and we got to go.
You're right. I mean, we're in such a fast society. The kids just think you're just placating them, that you're just, doing something before you have to go on to the next thing. But what you're saying, and I'll get this, maybe it's because I'm a therapist, but they'll say, don't be a therapist. And I think we have to be really careful of that too, is that we are just, we are really sincere. And I think, again, kids watch us. They watch us. Our teenagers watch us, and they want to know that what we are saying is what we believe, and vice versa, right?
And our actions, you are so right. They are wiser than they let on. And they are watching for that hypocrisy or that alignment and seeing if they can trust you. And that's beautiful. Let's move to, as a mother or as a caregiver or whatever, if you have someone who is dealing with anxiety or depression or addiction or whatever it might be, what are some of the things that can help us stay mentally well? Because I love this idea of alignment. How can we stay aligned? If we say you need to take time to be able to let down and relax, but I don't see moms doing that. I don't see myself doing that unless I'm being really intentional daily, which I try to be, and have pockets of peace so that I'm having that. But I also know that for a long time, I didn't tell my kids about my pockets of peace, or that I needed, or I told them no, or I felt this, once they come home from school, I'm all about them. And I felt badly about doing that. But then I finally hit a place where I was like, I'm a human being, and I need you guys to understand that. In fact, I told that to my daughter one time. I said, I need to be a human being. She said, that's right, Mom, not a human doing. And I realized she was giving me a lot of slack if I would just be honest with her and say, no, I need a half an hour to debrief because it's been a tough day and I can't take one more thing, which in turn, I noticed helped them feel they could do the same thing by giving permission. But what are some tips and tools for us to model this?
Let me tell you a little bit about women, and then I'll get to that. Because
Mm.
women we're relational. That's where our self-esteem comes from. It's our relationships. It's very different from men. Men's self-esteem comes from what they do and their productivity, and women are relationships. The problem is that if you base your self-esteem on a relationship and that relationship goes, then your self-esteem just went. Women in Utah, particularly, have more depression and take more antidepressants than any place in the country, 40 to 55 years old. Well, what happens with that? In that age group, the kids leave home. If you've only defined yourself in terms of being a mother, your identity just walked out that door. And so it's being able to define yourself in a way that you want to define yourself and do the things. And so when you're talking about just what you were, that's perfect, is that I have needs that I need too. And, and then I'll help you with yours. But if we do not help ourselves have a good self-esteem and feeling about who we are, it's really hard to help our kids, because then we start blaming ourselves.
Oh,
And
yes.
that isn't helpful at all.
And their success or whatever happens to them now determines our happiness or our worth, our value. So if they end up getting addicted, or if they don't go on a mission, or if they don't go to school, or if they don't hold a good job, suddenly it's the reflection on us. And I have found that it's not just the women who feel this, but people put that on the moms as well. Well, what happened to the kids, and they didn't turn out well, or whatever. And finding ways for women to understand, not just in words, that our self-worth is not outcome based on what our children choose. It's what we have done as mothers, women, wives, whatever, to be able to do. I've done the best that I can do. I love that you were bringing this up, because I find that women get this mentally, but they have a hard time accepting it emotionally, of being able to, I don't want to say separate, because it's all connected, but to interdependently see themselves as a woman and a wife and a mother, and still stay in that stronghold place of, I know who I am. And, my belief system, divinely as well as temporally, I know who I am. And so therefore, my boat is not rocked by the decisions of my spouse or my children or my mother-in-law or whatever. Any tips for that, of women being able to stand in that clear, solid identity place?
Well, I think, again, we all know it's taking time for ourselves, right? That we have to take time and not letting others define us. A lot of because we're so relational, we will look to my friend's doing this. Maybe I ought to do this. It's being able to say, no, I'm going to take time for myself, and spiritually kind of go into myself and really look and see really, truly who I am. Once we know that, and know that we can do things on our own without, just having everybody help us, then that is really useful too. And it teaches your children independence. I can do this as well. I can do it. Because mom showed me how to do it. And so I can do it as well.
So true. And I think if women understand to do this on the daily, not just this one moment, and it's this burst of, I'm going to go to a 3-day weekend and I need to get out of town, but it's a consistent practice, and it's a weaving into our lives and our children's lives, where they see the normalcy of it. Yesterday, I was speaking up at BYU for one of the classes in experience design. And interestingly, I got the time wrong, luckily in plenty of time. But on Monday morning, I went, oh my gosh, it's not at noon, it's at 2. Well, my little guy is coming home from school. So I have my 23-year-old home, and they all know and support my speaking and my writing and the things that I do with the women, with the Disciple Thought Leadership. And so I said to my daughter, what do you think about, my little guy just come back from another place, and it's a little bit difficult for him, and I wanted to make it a smooth transition. So years ago, I would have been like, oh, everything has to be canceled, or I have to do this totally, because I've got to be, totally focused on my kids. But what I've learned is as I weave them in back and forth to what I'm doing, they not only see how to balance family first, but they support one another because they're supporting me. So what we ended up doing is, my daughter drove my 10-year-old and me up to my speaking thing. They went to BYU bookstore, looked at books, had fun, got some presents for things, had a great time, got a snack, came back down, picked me up, And we all talked and laughed about what we did and shared what we got and what we experienced and blah, blah, blah. It was fabulous. And it was seamless, is what I told my daughter last night. It was such a joy. So we shared an experience instead of parallel lives, or mom putting this pressure on herself of, I've got to try to do this, but separate it from my family. Anyway, I see this so much of women thinking that it's wrong or less than for them to be doing something that brings them joy or gives them an outlet or whatever. And instead of thinking, how can I weave this in and use it to show my kids, hey, you can do this too. So I totally validate what you're saying.
I think it's really important, again, like what you're saying, get involved in the PTA, get involved in some of the things that are happening now with your kids. And there, I'm going to put a little bit of a worry in you guys, a little bit here, because our children are being groomed on the internet. So watch what you do and allow them to do. I have had 3 families this year that I have worked with where the child was groomed to get their parents in trouble. They got upset with their dad and did not want him in the home anymore. And they were told how to get him out of the home.
Oh my goodness. I
So,
haven't even heard of this.
Yes, it was 3 families that I have worked with, and it was really scary. I mean, these are not families that, you know, aren't stable. I mean, they
Good
thought
families.
that they were doing what they were involved in their children's lives. They were doing, and it just completely shocked them. And so you have to be really careful with that.
With what they're viewing and what they're doing. And you bring up such a good point, because I've talked to a lot of kids or young adults who feel like they keep hearing the social media warnings and scares. They keep hearing the pornography, stay away, blah, 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 blah. They just tune out on this stuff. So we have talked about as a family, what can we do to combat this actively? Like, what are we going to choose instead? Doing games, just not even waiting for game night, but just after dinner, just a couple of games. We only do 15, 20 minutes. It's not like it's the whole night, but we're just doing some things that are connectors so that we're connecting. Now, my understanding is that one of the roots of addiction is disconnection. Is that right?
That's right. It's the opposite. Addiction is the opposite of connection. And so if you're able to connect with people and tell them, and especially about your emotions, then addiction is very, I mean, you can still get addicted, but
It's less likely.
It's like,
so maybe as mothers and as caregivers or whatever, focusing on the good, focusing on spending time together or having things that we connect on, whether it's maybe one of the things that you love to do that you would do on your own is pickleball, and maybe involving the family. I know that's something we've ended up doing, is saying, okay, where's the Venn diagram sweet spot? I like pickleball. Maybe you could like pickleball. Let's try it. Hey, we all like pickleball. We're doing it for spring break. We're like, okay, let's go play pickleball. Maybe it's sitting down as a family and saying, well, what are things that we like to do, or things that we could try that they like to do? Maybe as a parent, you don't like to do snowboarding, but maybe your teens love it, and you can find a Venn diagram sweet spot of, I can drive you up, I'll sit in the lodge, I'll read a book, and then we'll all talk about it when you come in, and we'll laugh, and then you'll go back out, whatever. What are some other connector things or ideas that you have?
And I think you're doing, I mean, what you're saying is right. I mean, it's got to be, what do you want to do as a child, not just what do I want to do. But let me tell you one other thing too. I think I've heard so many times that, oh, I just don't watch the news anymore. It really depresses me. And I feel like that. I mean, it's not as positive like we want it to be, but I think as parents, we have got to know what's going on.
Good point.
We cannot live in a bubble. We've got to know what's going on so that we can combat it. And so we may not know. And so it's talking to your children, even when they come home, and say, what happened in school today? Was there anything weird that happened or anything? Or was everything good or whatever? I think again, that goes back to that communication. And then, and then using activities that you have that tie into those things that are deficient in what your children are learning at school, or things that you feel that they need to learn a little bit better.
I love that. And looking for those opportunities or creating them. I know that's been a focus for us as a family when our schedules have shifted. We've had our pockets of time together and then schedule shift, someone leaves the home, someone comes back into the home. Things shift and we've had to shift with it. And one thing I know for me is that sometimes it's going to create a little bit of inconvenience, but if we look for it, we can find the new connecting place. One of the things that happened for me now, I don't know, this doesn't work for everyone, but it just was having to call out and find is that I just have my 10-year-old and my 17-year-old at home, but he was riding the bus home. But I found that when he got home from the bus, what he had done was talk on the bus a whole bunch with his friends and stuff. So he didn't want to talk anymore. And when he got home, he was just like, I just want to numb out. I just want to chill, right? I just want to go do something else or play with friends or like go outside or whatever. But I wasn't getting what was going on at school. So I started picking him up at school. Now he's only 5-6 minutes down the road, maybe 8, So what I found is if I would pick him up at school, I got him fresh from school. And then he would tell me details that I would not get later. And then I would drive slow home. So it took us a good 10, 12 minutes. And things that I could ask him, he would start sharing what were some of the playground politics and what were some of the things that were happening that I wasn't getting when he was getting home. Now, when you look at the schedule, like, well, I don't have time to go pick up, and you may not, so no pressure. But what I found, I thought the same thing. But then I went, if I can get that 12 minutes with him, that is gold that I won't get later that I could try to extract for 30 to 45 minutes, which sounds, but we've got to be proactive about this stuff. But anyway, looking for those sneaky moments, not sneaky, but those intentional moments that we can carve out. I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Well, what you're saying is you got to be able to be talking to your children when they're ready to talk. And, and he's ready to talk. Then your teenager may be ready to talk when she's on her way to bed,
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you have to be really ready to talk then. I think too, one of the things that the activities is getting your kids involved in things that they like, if it's sports, if it's music, if it's things like that, but not too over programming. We tend to over program our children and, give them time just to be creative and just to be outside and to enjoy nature and things like that. But I see a lot of over programming and kids just don't want to be over programmed.
I love the point that you make that they need things they love to do, establishes skills, helps them to feel confident when they're with their buddies and their friends, and time to assimilate that experience. How did that go today? What was it that happened? So they're not going from thing to thing to thing to thing, and then they can't breathe, hurry and eat, get your bath, and then get in bed. There's no time to process any learning or what happened, how do I feel about that? So I love that you bring up, yes, have things that they love to do, but let's allow time for that expansion and that experience of it that we can share and connect on.
And can I tell you another thing too? It's the basics that we're teaching our children. I don't know if you're aware of the the artificial intelligence stuff that's coming out.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Where you can just tell them what to do and they'll write a paper for you.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, for us as parents, we have got to be involved in that and say, no, we're not going to do that. I want you to think this through. I mean, you can use some of it, but I want you to think it through so you learn to write. I cannot tell you how many of my students on a college level do not know how to write. I will read their essays and think, what in the world are they even saying? How can we communicate if we don't know how to write?
Oh my goodness, it's so true. And we are kind of coming back, that T.S. Eliot, we come back to the beginning and know it for the first time, right? Where now kids are having a hard time knowing how to speak and how to write and just these basics. And before listeners get totally depressed, with such a little bit of it's like a small shift of the rudder, we can help them. We can make that difference. And again, it goes back to those small and simple intentional interactions where maybe you don't have time to go through their homework every single day, or maybe not for an hour, but you can do it for 10 minutes and say, hey, let's look at what you got. Here's one suggestion and try that. So now they know that piece for next time. It doesn't have to be all day, every day. We can just be intentional about those pieces. I know there's one last thing, and I know our time is running out, but I wanted to have you share on this addiction piece. I know that you have some modalities that you have seen some success with, and I know this is such a huge piece For especially moms who are at the end of their rope and they don't know what else to do with their loved one that's struggling with this, what are some things that you are seeing that are working with this?
Well, first of all, you can't label someone an addict. Once you label someone an addict, that's what you'll be. So you have to find the good things in them, find the strengths in them, find the solutions. Instead of focusing on the problem all the time, focus on the solution, which you're really good at. You keep bringing that into what is good here? What can we do? Which is really good. But let me tell you, in my mind, the future of mental health is going to be not necessarily medications because they're not working, but this is going to sound a little bit different, but I have seen they're using psychedelics and ketamine now. And what I have seen with ketamine is amazing. If you have someone in your family that has not been able to get over anxiety or depression for years and years and years, and it's treatment resistant, nothing works, we're seeing people turn around with ketamine in 2 weeks.
Oh, my word.
They
Now, I
may,
want to make the point. This is under supervision, and
yes,
this is
yes.
with clinicians and professionals who have been trained in the use of these.
Yes, and make sure when you pick a clinic that you're going to do with ketamine with that, it does do that. I believe that it's kind of unethical not to do therapy with the ketamine because yes, you can have a bad experience. But people, especially teenagers, we work with kids who are 16 and up or who are super suicidal. It just, what it's doing is changing the brain. It's changing the chemistry in the brain quickly. So I would say, look at some of the things that are out there, because if you are having problems that are not being fixed, yes, don't know what to do, look at some things, but make sure that it's a reputable place. Yeah.
I love that. And if they need that, they can contact you and find out more. And I love the point that you made that it's been treatment resistant. So they've tried different modalities. And I love that you bring in therapy as well. I mean, even with my Asperger's son, people were wanting to put medication in there. I said, as long as we've tried everything we can do with the behaviors and we combine it with starting at the lowest level of medication. And that's what he was able to stay on, with increasing the behavior and the modalities that we could do with them so that he's a high functioning electrician. So I think these are really important pieces that we don't just grab at a solution and a drug or something, but we're having this whole perspective and way of approaching it. So I love that.
And don't be afraid. I mean, there's a whole lot of different things out there now. I mean, and most people will say, yeah, medications don't work for me. They just, they kind of tend to flatline me. And I don't like to feel like that. I want to feel, passionate about life instead of, down all the time. And medications can tend to do that. And so we don't know a lot about the brain. Right? That's the last frontier. And so it's all these things, and we don't really know, except we know that what happens with ketamine, it changes the neural pathways, which are your thinking pathways, quickly. We know that. We've seen that. And it's amazing to watch. And there's tons of research out there now on it.
That's what I was just going to say. There's so much research, and this has been for years. It's not just some little trendy thing. I think that's wonderful that you said, find out more, see if it's a fit. Speaking of, if people are wanting to know more about that, or wanting to know more about things, modalities you can do with someone who's dealing with anxiety and depression, what's the best way for them to reach you?
rbh.care, www.rbh.care, or ketamineauthority.com.
Love it. And that way you can ask questions and get some consultation, find out if it's a fit for you or your loved one. I think that's wonderful.
And the other thing is we've got lots of people who testimonials of how it's changed their lives. And we haven't asked those people to do it. They'll say, please, can I come and do it so I can tell people about it? So when that happens, it's working.
Oh, that is fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us today and helping us to touch on some of these points. And hopefully for those listening, they've been able to take a little piece, a takeaway, and say, I could try that today. I can create some intentional space. I can make a safe space. I can ask, tell me more. I can do some of these things to start making a shift. It doesn't have to be huge. It can just be a little trickle and start one thing today. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Trish. And for those that are liking these, if you're loving these spotlights, please go back and check our other Tuesday spotlights. We have so many topics that we cover and great takeaways that you can use today to move forward in living your purpose-filled life.